Welcome to the ASCO e-learning weekly podcast, a weekly educational series focused on helping learners identify knowledge gaps and stay up to date with the latest in new drug developments, cancer treatments, and patient care approaches. This episode is complementary to an education session presented at the 2019 Annual Meeting. For more detailed information about the education session, make sure to check the episode description for links to ASCO's meeting library.
The last talk that we have in this session is The Obligation of the Cured from Scott Capozza. After being diagnosed with cancer during his last year of physical therapy school, Scott initially did not want to do anything with oncology. He wanted to move beyond his own diagnosis and treatments, did not want to be associated with cancer either personally or professionally. Now, 20 years later, Scott understands not just the significance of being a cancer survivor, but the obligation that comes with being a cancer survivor. Scott Capozza.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Good afternoon. I'm honored and humbled to share the stage with such amazing speakers. I'm going to do my best, Anthony Rizzo, to hit cleanup this afternoon for you guys. As a cancer survivor, we have so many questions that are really hard to answer. Obviously, the first one is, why did I get cancer? And we may never truly get an answer physiologically why we got cancer. So then a lot of us are left with the next question. Why did I survive? And for me, I was no different. As Dr. Johnson said, I was in physical therapy school finishing up my last year when I was diagnosed with stage 2 testicular cancer. Somehow I made it through treatment and college all at the same time. And as I'm ready to move beyond that and not look back, I get a phone call from my good friend Alyssa several months later. She told me that her father had just been diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer. Sadly, 2 months later, he passed away. And I immediately went up to Boston and tried to be as good of a friend as I possibly could to support her through that horrible time. And I remember at the wake, she was trying to introduce me to her cousins. And she said, "This is my friend Scott, and he's a CERT. He's a CERT." And she couldn't say it. She couldn't say that I was a cancer survivor. And that was the first time I ever experienced survivor's guilt. And that's when I started to wrestle in my head. This doesn't make sense. Where's the justification in this? Here I am, I'm this young kid, I'm not married, I don't have kids, heck, I don't even have a job, but I'm still here. And my friend's father, who has an amazing wife, brilliant, beautiful kids, he's a pillar in his community, he loses this battle to cancer. It wasn't fair. But again, I tried to be as good of a friend as I possibly could to Alyssa, so I would keep going up to Boston, and if she needed to vent and cry about the loss of her dad, then I would just be present and listen. If she needed to be distracted, then we would go out with friends and we would have fun. But it kept turning over and over in my head. Where does this make sense? It doesn't make sense to me. So probably 6 or 8 months later, I remember we were hanging out, and I told her in all honesty, I said, if it could have been any different, if I could have lost my battle to cancer so that your dad could still be here, I would want it that way. And she didn't miss a beat. She turned right around and she said, well, maybe the reason why you're still here is to help me get through the loss of my dad. And in that moment, the switch was flipped. That's when I started to realize that we, as cancer survivors, have this immense responsibility, that it's not just good enough to just make it through surgery and chemo and radiation. We have an obligation to move forward and help today's cancer survivor and the person who's going to be diagnosed tomorrow. And it can look different for different survivors. It can look different over the whole trajectory of the cancer experience. It could be something as profound as the young man who was also diagnosed in college. He was diagnosed with Burkitt's lymphoma. He also happened to be a government science major. And so when he graduated and finished his treatment, he started working for the local state senator. And they worked together, and they crafted a bill that went to the state Senate, and it was passed. And it said that insurance companies in our state had to cover fertility preservation for cancer survivors. It could be something as beautiful and creative as the young woman who was diagnosed with T-cell lymphoma. And after her stem cell transplant, her GVHD was so bad, she couldn't walk. She couldn't get dressed. She couldn't hold a cup. But now, years later, she's doing better. She's doing so well, in fact, that this summer, she's going home to her native Uganda to get a particular kind of thread that you can only get in Uganda so that she can put together, she can sew headdresses and scarves for the boutique at our cancer center. For me, it took some time, it took some soul searching, but I eventually became the physical therapist for the first ever adult survivorship clinic, multidisciplinary survivorship clinic at Yale New Haven Hospital. But don't discount this simple phone call, this simple text to somebody who's going through treatment. That one text, you're acting like the Coast Guard cutter, throwing the lifeline to somebody who's going through the turbulent seas of cancer treatment. Being present, taking somebody out for a cup of coffee, it may cost you $4.95 for that venti latte, but it's invaluable for that cancer survivor. And so I ask all of the providers that are here today to talk with your survivors. Nurture and foster this. And again, it may not happen overnight. Some survivors are going to come out of treatment, they're going to ring that bell on the last day, and they're going to be raring to go. They want to change the world. And others, it's going to take some time. And that's okay. Everybody is different. And for all the survivors who are here today, I ask you, I challenge you, to look within yourselves. Think, what can you do? Sign up for that charity bike ride. Volunteer for that camp for kids with cancer. Do something. Again, look within yourself and figure out how you'll answer the obligation of the cured.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the ASCO eLearning Weekly Podcast. To make us part of your weekly routine, click subscribe. Let us know what you think by leaving a review. For more information, visit the Comprehensive eLearning Center at elearning.asco.org. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. This is not a substitute for medical care and is not intended for use in the diagnosis or treatment of individual conditions. Guests on this podcast express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions. The mention of any product, service, organization, activity, or therapy should not be construed as an ASCO endorsement.